Okay, so now I'm going to demo a plate. Plates are honestly not that hard to throw. It's more getting them through the whole process that's the hard part. So getting them dry evenly, getting them trimmed, getting them compressed, not trimming through the bottom, and getting them fired without them warping. So really it's all about the way you treat the clay after you're done throwing. The biggest thing about when you're throwing is probably compression. Again, I say that a lot in these videos, but compression is key. Also, it takes more clay than you'd think to throw a decent sized plate. This will probably not be a huge plate. I'm using a bigger bat in case it gets wider than I think it might. It's always nice to make sure you have some extra space on your bat. You don't want your plate to hang over the edge of the bat. You're just really liable to mess it up, to bump into it when it was wet. So we need a lot of clay because we need to have a foot ring. So a good plate has a foot ring on the bottom that we trim into it instead of it just being flat on the kiln shelf. That's so you can put glaze underneath it so everything shrinks the same way. If you have a wide expanse without glaze, it can sometimes lead to issues. So we want to make sure there's enough space to have a foot ring that's at least a 1/4 inch off. The inside is 1/4 inch off the surface. So I need a decent amount of clay to do that with a wide plate. So I've got a decent chunk of clay here. I'm going to push it down, get it attached to my wheel head. You really want to do plates on bats. It is nearly impossible, I won't say totally impossible, but nearly impossible to move a plate off a wheel head and have it stay squared up and centered and not warp on you. So use a bat, that's important. So I'm getting this clay stuck down and we'll get moving here. I'm going to center this clay just like I usually would. So coning up and coning down. If it's a lot of clay and you need to use the technique where both your hands are on the back side of that clay, you should do that. Help yourself out. It's not cheating, it's not giving up, it is doing what you need to do to move that clay. Sounds like my bat's a little bit loose, but that's all right. Sometimes that happens. I can work with it. If you hear that a lot and it's making your bat move, you can either try a different bat, or if you've already started, you can take a piece of wet clay and stick it underneath the bat, because that wet clay is going to hold that bat on there a little bit better. I'm just going to roll with it. It's not that bad. So I've got a centered lump of clay here. I'm not going to open it like I usually do. For a plate, I'm going to start walking this clay out. I'm going to apply pressure in the middle and start slowly dragging that side of my hand down and across. Gonna do that again. Start dragging it out. And this is why you need a lot of clay, right? Because you need a disc of clay basically that is about a 1/2 inch thick. So if you think that your piece is going to be about a 1/4 inch thick and your foot is going to be about a 1/4 inch high, that'd be about a 1/2 inch thick. Now your piece doesn't necessarily have to be a 1/4 inch thick. It could be thinner, but keep in mind if you're just starting, to kind of think about that 1/2 inch thickness on this disc we're making. So I'm using both my hands as a unit. They're touching each other, and I'm flattening out this disc, slowly drawing it out. want to make sure the edges get stuck down. Trying to keep this as level as possible. I'm going to check my thickness here. That is more than a ½ inch still, so I'm going to go ahead and thin it out some more. And always remember shrinkage when you're doing plates. The bigger something is, the more it shrinks. So if you're trying to make a big plate, just remember that shrinkage of this clay. It's about 13% when it's all said and done. Alright, I think I'm about there on my thickness. So before I start do anything else, I'm going to take some time and compress this clay. Compression is so important. The wider a piece is, the more compression matters. It's got this wide expanse of clay that just wants to crack on you. It's its favorite thing to do is crack. So we're going to get a rib, clean it off, and start compressing this clay. You'll want a pretty firm rib to do this step. You're holding it at an angle, a kind of extreme angle to the piece, and applying pressure downward. I'm not trying to remove a bunch of clay. I'm trying to compress and to make sure the thing is pretty flat. So if I take this away, there's a little bit of clay built up, but nothing significant. You really want to compress until you feel like you are done, and then compress a little more. There's no such thing as too much compression. So once you feel like you've compressed a lot, we're going to start to turn up the lip. Now, first of all, I want to check and make sure that my piece is pretty close to symmetrical. This is a time where I could take if my piece wasn't fully centered when I started throwing it, I could take this opportunity to use my pin tool and cut away anything that was off. Now mine's pretty symmetrical, so I'm not going to cut it, because when I turn up the lip, it ends up getting a little off anyway, so I'm not going to worry about it. But if it's really off, you can really help yourself out by trimming it and removing that clay, and then you have a symmetrical piece. So to start turning up the lip, depending on what style of plate you want, obviously, you kind of dig your fingers underneath here and start turning that clay up and getting a place where you can make pulls from. I'm going to turn down my wheel now. You can have a simple plate with not much of a rim. You could have a very big rim that has a lot of detail. It's really going to be up to you and what style plate you like. Some people like very flat plates. Some people like a plate with more of a lip like's going on right here. Some people want something in between. You might want a sort of like plate for things that are saucy, so you need to have a decent wall on it. So it's really going to be your preference here. So I'm just doing little pulls on this lip to thin it out to where I feel like is appropriate for this size plate. So I could have a plate that has a lip like this. It has quite a lip. It'd be more like a pasta plate or something that was for something that's very saucy. I kind of like the classic slightly raised but flat ridge along the edge that has a nice definition. So we're going to take a rib and we're going to start working with that. And I'm going to put my hand underneath and start to fold this open. And I'm going to turn my wheel down. Doesn't need to be going that fast. And now is the back and forth of defining that ridge. What do I want it to look like? How much of a sharp line should there be? Should it be soft? And it's all preference. It's all what you think a plate should be. Maybe we'll go with like a soft line here. I want to be really careful of that center, that I'm not digging into it with the side of the rib. Just be really cautious, have good control over your tools. Go slow. Your wheel does not need to be moving fast here. You're doing finish work, not fast work. So I'm going to need to even out the edge now. And again, my hand's going underneath. And I'm still making connection with the pin tool with both hands. And I'm gonna cut this. Okay. I'm gonna turn my wheel off and remove this from my plate. And then I'm going to go in and smooth out, soften out that edge of my plate. Don't want any sharp edges on this. Remember, something's covered in glass, it's going to be quite sharp. It also just doesn't look that nice. It makes the glaze run away from the edge, and it also makes it a lot easier to chip. And if you're clumsy like me, you want to make things so that they're less likely to chip. It's amazing I don't have more broken ceramics in my house. I have some. As my children get older, I'm sure I will have more, because they will want to touch it. This you can spend a lot of time kind of going back and forth, cleaning up, finishing up what you want, making sure things are compressed. When you're happy with what you have, you can do your final cleanup, get rid of any extra slip. And I always take if I can, get a wooden knife under there, take away some extra clay if I can, or at least make a nice ridge. And I do the same thing with the pin tool. I'm going to get down low and cut in there. And then I'm done throwing my plate. Now, I like to cut plates on the corner of a table because I can hold the wire tool down, the handles below, and I can pull it through and pull it at a downward angle so I don't cut up into the plate. Let's see if I can do this on my chair, because this wheel head, can you still see it? You can kind of see it. So you can see my plate there. I'm going to take my wire tool and I'm going to set that wire into that groove that I made with the pin tool. I'm going to carefully, without touching the plate itself, get that wire in that groove. Take your time doing that, and then when it's in that groove nicely, pull down. You want a downward angle on those handles, and only pull on one handle at a time, and hold the other one down, and it'll cut through without cutting up into your plate. So now I've got my plate cut, and now it needs to dry enough for me to flip it over so I can get the bottom drying so we can trim it.